Hey there, Nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we are back with an episode of Cheap Shots. This series is dedicated to showing you specifically money-saving tips to help you on your miniature wargaming journey. And on today's episode, we're going to show you guys how to cheaply and quickly paint up Warhammer 40,000 Kill Team Voidscarred Corsairs. As you can see right here, this is the end result of what these Eldar pirates will look like by using the tips, materials, and techniques that we suggest painting up your Voidborn Corsairs. You can get exactly the same tabletop result as you see here on this photo for a grand total investment of $31.82, and that's assuming that, of course, you're purchasing all these materials for the very first time. When you compare that to what Citadel and Army Painter will require you to purchase to paint exactly the same way we did, it will cost you a grand total investment of $209.55. And when you compare that to our Cheapskate method, we're saving you $177.73. So that being said, let's go ahead and show you guys how to quickly and more importantly cheaply paint up some Voidscarred Corsairs for your next game of Warhammer 40,000 Kill Team. So I do have to apologize a little bit. I did go ahead and assemble these guys way ahead of time before I even got a chance to take a photo. Same thing with the texturing on these. You'll see this for the next couple of cheap shots, and the reason why is because I got really excited about these projects and I started getting into them without taking photos of the steps I was taking first, so I do apologize. After all, this is not a professional channel. This is a hobby channel, so if I'm going to make mistakes, oh well. So the first thing you got to do, of course, is to assemble your miniatures. As you can see, I decided to assemble my miniatures thusly. I thought these poses looked really, really cool, and I really like the way that these guys turned out, so that's the reason why I assembled them the way that I did. I'm not planning on using these guys as a kill team for Warhammer 40,000 Kill Team, but rather as a Cold Trader Outcast gang in games of Necromunda, so that's the reason why I went with the poses that I did. Now, once you, of course, get done assembling the miniatures, the first thing I do, of course, is to texture the bases. Now, for my texture, of course, I like to use a Cheapskate method, which consists of dirt as well as wood glue. What I do is I take some sand from my backyard, I just filter real quick to find some good grains of sand, and I paint the entire base in wood glue. I then dust it with the sand that I have there. I let it dry, and then once it's done doing that, what I do is I create a slurry with a 50-50 mixture of water and wood glue. Basically, you mix the two together until it's about the consistency of milk, and then you apply it like a wash all over the bases. And what's going to happen is that when that dries, it's going to create a perfect seal. It's going to keep that texturing on your bases. And that stuff is completely free because these are things I had lying around the house. Now, you could, of course, use Citadel's Astroground if you want to, which is a beautiful texture paint, but that costs $7.80. Well, my method is absolutely free, which is items I have lying around the house. The next thing we need to do, of course, is to prime our miniatures. In this case, I use Rust-Oleum Flat White Primer and get this in my local Walmart for about $3.99 to just do a once quick over the entirety of the miniature. Now, for what priming what it does, it creates a surface for your acrylic paints to actually adhere to when you paint it directly onto your miniature. If you were to take bare plastic of your miniature and apply acrylic paint to it, the surface tension is not enough to actually keep the acrylic paint onto that surface, and so the slightest bit of friction, it'll rub completely right off your miniature, ruining the finish on it. That's the reason why you want to use primer, because the primer actually helps the acrylic paint to adhere to your miniature. Now, when it comes to primers, there's multiple different types of primers you can use. Traditionally speaking, though, if you're going for more vibrant, bright colored paint job for your miniatures, you want to go with a white primer. If you're going with a darker kind of paint tone, you go with black, and if you want to go something in the middle, you go with gray midtones. For me, I just use white because I'm going to do an oil wash over these miniatures, which is going to reduce the vibrancy of my colors. So that's the reason why I'm going with a white primer for this one. Now, once you get that letting that dry, what you gotta do now is add 2 thin coats of Delta Serum Coats Peaches and Cream. You can get this at your local Hobby Lobby for about 65 cents. This is a really good product. It's a nice kind of pale flesh kind of color. The color that you would have to get from Citadel is Flayed One Flesh, which costs $4.55. And if you want to use another product from Citadel, which would be Corax White Spray, that's going to cost you $17. So right off the bat, we're saving you a bunch of money. We haven't even started applying a lot of colors on these miniatures yet. So the primary color we're going to have for these miniatures is going to be their jumpsuits, which is actually made up, I believe it's called Armor Weave Armor, I believe is what it's called. I do apologize if I get the nomenclature and the vocabulary incorrect on these guys. I don't play Warhammer 40,000, so I'm really not sure what they call different things. So whatever these suits that these guys are wearing, their armor, I decided to pick down 2 thin layers of Tuscan Teal by Apple Barrel Paint. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. I just apply this all over the body armor that's going to be exposed, that I thought were like a really cool kind of turquoise color. The corresponding color for this from Games Workshop would be Citadel's Thunderhawk Blue, which costs $4.55, which is about 9 times more than my 2-ounce tube of craft paint. So the next detail we're going to paint on these miniatures real fast are things like their helmets, as well as their shoulder pads, their boots, as well as their gauntlets that they're wearing as well. We're going to pick that on 2 thin layers of pigment by Apple Barrel Paint. Same thing with that little hawk-like creature that the guy with the animal handler is also holding on to as well. So we're going to pick that on 2 thin layers of pavement by Apple Barrel Paint. You can get this stuff at your local Walmart for about 50 cents, and it's a beautiful color. It's actually a really dark gray, almost black in appearance, but the reason why I love using this color so much is because it has a little bit of a texture to it, and when you apply dry brushing to it, does a beautiful job of catching those surfaces, and that's I'm in love with that pavement paint by Apple Barrel Paint. It's plentiful. It does a really good job. I like what it does. Now, the corresponding color to that, of course, would be Eshin Gray by Citadel. That's going to cost you $4.55, which is about 9 times more than what you would spend using the cheap craft paints. And once you put that good base layer on for both those colors, next we got to do now is start working on our details. And that detail is going to be a dry brush all over the armor, as well as the black gloves, shoulder pads, as well as boots and the helmets of these guys we painted in black earlier. What we're going to do is we're going to dry brush this in a thin dry brush of Folk Arts Dutch Aqua. This costs you 75 cents at your local Walmart. The Games Workshop equivalent to this would be Athematic Blue, made by Citadel. That's going to cost $7.80 for that one, almost about 10 times as much. And what you're going to do is you just do a quick dry brush all over the turquoise and the black that we've done on these miniatures so far, minus the hawk. We're going to leave the hawk alone when we're doing that. Now, the reason why we're doing this is for a couple reasons. One, the dry brushing what it's going to do is going to create this illusion of depth in our miniatures. The dry brushing method actually creates the pigment of your paint to adhere to the raised surfaces of your miniatures while leaving the darker color in the recesses. This is going to create the illusion of shadow as well as depth on your miniature as well. Another thing it's going to do as well is it's going to kind of blend our colors with that turquoise, kind of give like this otherworldly kind of color with all the black armor elements that we've done for these guys, and it makes it look really, really simple and very easy for us to do that because it brings a lot of those details we couldn't see before with just the base coating. Now, if you do notice, there is kind of like a chalky pastel finish with this miniatures by doing this dry brushing technique, and it is kind of a weird look, but do not stress out. And the reason why is because when we get to our oil washing, it's going to smooth out those transitions, it's going to blend those colors, and that chalkiness is going to go away. Now, the next color we're going to focus on is all the earth tone colors we have on these guys, and the reason why is because a lot of these guys are wearing capes, and these cloaks are made out of animal hides and skin of their various victims. And so because we're going to use a variety of earth tone colors to use this, we're going to use flesh for some of the guys that look like it's made out of skin. That's made by Apple Barrel Paint. It costs 50 cents at your local Walmart. The Citadel equivalent would be Cadian flesh tone, which costs 9 times as much at $4.55. We're also going to use nutmeg brown for some of the darker skin tones that we're seeing on some of the armor these guys are wearing. Nutmeg brown, of course, is made by Apple Barrel Paint, costs 50 cents at my local Walmart. Bugman's Glow would be the Citadel equivalent for that, 9 times as much at $4.55 for that color. And we're also going to use Burnt Sienna by Folk Art in order to create some of the actual fur cloaking that's going on with some of the guys the cloaks are wearing as well. That's going to cost you 75 cents at your local Walmart as well. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 75 cents, whereas the Citadel version with that would be Doombull Brown, which would cost you $4.55 for that color. And then lastly, for some of the other cloaks that we have for like the guys on the right hand side, we're going to go with a really rich burnt umber look for that. We're going to use Apple Barrel's burnt umber for 50 cents. The equivalent color to that would be Wildwood, which costs us $7.80 at Citadel. So as you see there, we're saving a ton of money just on the cloaks right now, just by themselves. We're going to put 2 thin layers on all the parts we want on these cloaks to kind of create that rich kind of contrasting brown and earth tone color, which contrasts very nicely with the turquoise and the black that these guys are wearing. Now, for the fighters that actually had their cloaks done in burnt sienna as well as in burnt umber, what we're going to do is we're actually going to dry brush that the thin layer of territorial beige real quick by Apple Barrel Paint. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. I love this stuff. The Citadel equivalent to that would be Baylor Brown at $4.55 as well. We're just going to do a quick real dry brush on the capes, and the reason why we're doing a really easy dry brush on these guys specifically is because their capes look like it's just fabric is what it is. So that part is quite nice. So it's going to be really, really simple to actually do those. The other fighters, however, theirs look like they're made of animal hide and animal skin, and we're going to talk about that next. Now, for these 3 fighters specifically, their capes look like they're made out of actual human beings, what they're actually made out of. Actually made out of skin of some people or some kind of animal for the most part. The guys on the left-hand side, they just look like they're made out of some kind of scaly beast, so we're using that darker brown inside for that for the interior of the leather. We're going to dry brush that with a thin layer of flesh by Apple Barrel to catch those raised surfaces and rips and tears inside their cloaks. And the guy on the far right-hand side, his actually looks like it's made from different pieces of human skin. We're going to use Delta Sarin Coats Peaches and Cream in order to do the dry brushing on that one. You can actually see some of the stitching that was revealed that we couldn't see earlier before. Now, for the other 2 fighters, they just look like they have like animal scales on the back of their cloaks, make it look like they skinned this off of some sort of animal. So to do that, we're going to use some really interesting colors in order to create that illusion. We're We're going to use Bright Blue by Apple Barrel Paint for the fighter on the left-hand side. That costs 50 cents at my local Walmart. The Citadel equivalent would be Techless Blue, which costs 9 times as much at $4.55. And the guy on the right-hand side, we're going to pick down 2 thin layers of Holly Branch by Apple Barrel Paint as well. It's a beautiful bright green color. It costs 50 cents at my local Walmart, whereas Caliban Green from Citadel will cost 9 times that much as $4.55. We just put 2 thin layers on the scales on both of these guys' backs, and then from there we move on to a dry brush. So for the fighter who's got the blue-skinned cloak that we have there, we're going to pick his out with a dry brush of Sky Blue, which costs 50 cents at my local Walmart. The color equivalent to that from Citadel would be Blue Horror, which costs $4.55, which is 9 times as much. And for the fighter who's got the green scales on their cloak, we're going to pick that at a thin dry brushing of Lime Sherbet, which costs 50 cents at my local Walmart, made by Apple Barrel Paint. The equivalent color to that from Games Workshop would be Cyberite Green, which runs $4.55. What this does, it kind of creates this illusion of depth in the miniature by creating those highlights on those scales along the ridges and the spikes and the spines of those scales, while leaving that darker color in the recess as well. So it looks really awesome up to this point. As for the fighter, it looks like his cloak is made out of human skin. For the stitching, all we did is we picked down 2 thin layers of pigment paint real quick. We just kind of went through and just kind of marked each of those little hash marks to make it look like it's all bound together with some kind of black thread, keeping it all together. We could use, like, looking back now, I should have probably used red. Red would have actually been a really nice accent color, especially since it contrasts so nicely with the turquoise of his body armor. But, you know, hindsight's 2020, so c'est la vie. The last detail we're going to work on with these cloaks are these 2 fighters here, which is, I believe, the leader of this kill team on the left-hand side, as well as, I guess, as a wizard or a psyker on the right-hand side as well. They have like these fur tufts along the shoulders of their cloaks. As you can see, it looks like just like normal fabric with just these nice little fur tufts attached to them. So what it is, I picked down 2 thin layers of Pewter Gray by Apple Barrel Paint. This stuff costs about 50 cents for 2 ounces at my local Walmart. The equivalent color to this from Citadel would be Slanesh Gray, which costs 9 times as much, with $4.55. And all I do real quick is put 2 thin layers of Pewter Gray all over the fur tufts, and once that dries, we're going to go on with a dry brush real quick. And to dry brush that real fast, we're going to use Pale Gray by Folk Art. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 75 cents. It's a beautiful off-white color. It's a very, very, very bright gray. Almost white, actually. And it works really, really well, especially when you use oil washing and dry brushing like I do with my miniatures. The equivalent color to this from Citadel, of course, would be, looks like it's Ulthuan Gray, which costs $4.55 for that product. So just do a quick dry brushing on the fur tufts, and we can start working on some of the finer details now on these miniatures. So the first key detail we're going to work on is all the red on these guys. And yes, there's actually quite a bit of red with these miniatures because the color contrasts so nicely with the turquoise and with the browns these guys are wearing as well. That color really pops against their armor that they're actually wearing. So you notice these guys are wearing sashes around their waist. They also got ribbons tied around their arms as well. We got one guy's actually got a face mask that's picked down in red. So what I do is I look for all the red elements these guys have, and I pick this down 2 thin layers of Anita's Acrylic True Red. You can get this at your local Hobby Lobby for about 65 cents. The Games Workshop equivalent to this would be Mephiston Red, which costs $4.55 for that. I just put 2 thin layers of this red anywhere else that you want to have a red detail for. As you can see, it really pops and vibes really nicely with that turquoise color they have as a nice contrast. And when we put an oil wash on it, it's going to make those dark reds even darker and even more vibrant, which is going to have a really nice reaction when it comes to the oil wash on this. And I also put out, I forgot to mention this too, but for the little ribbon of the little falcon thing that the animal handler in the back has, I also put that on the ribbons along its talons. So the next detail we're going to work on real quick is on the hair of these characters. So as you can see that here, I just basically kind of broke them up between different groups for the most part. Basically, I had one guy with the hawk handler. I painted his hair in burnt umber. For the guy with that huge Ganon looking thing, he's actually got territory beige for his hair. For 3 of my other guys, I used King's Gold by Apple Barrel's Paint. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. The equivalent color from Games Workshop would be Averland Sunset, which costs more than 9 times more at $4.55 for that. And then for the giant soul-wielding guy on the left, as well as the leader of my little kill team, I picked their hair out in 2 coats of pigment paint. And the next detail we're going to focus now is on all their leather goods, specifically their holsters, belts, sheaths, sashes of belts they have crisscrossing their body, all kinds of different details in these guys. Now, the reason why we decided to go with this kind of brownish color, we're going with Anita's Acrylic Moccasin Brown, costs 65 cents at your local Hobby Lobby. The equivalent color to this would be Games Workshop's XV88, which costs $4.55. And the reason why we're going with this color is because this color contrasts nicely with the red. It complements those colors nicely because it's kind of like a ruddy kind of brown color. color, so it complements it nicely with the red, but is enough of a contrast against the turquoise where it really stands out as well. As you see, these guys are wearing belts across their shoulders with little emblems on it, so I picked those details out. Same thing with all the holsters and the pouches that they have carrying on there, all their weapons and gear, the sheaths of their guns, as well as their sword scabbards and scabbards for their daggers. The guy on the right hand side's got this weird kind of tubular system on his back. The guy's kneeling, and I picked that out, 2 thin layers of that. So whatever leather goods that you want to have picked out directly on these guys, put in 2 thin layers of moccasin brown, and they're ready to move on. So once again, we're going back to going back to Khaki by Apple Barrel Paint. This stuff costs 50 cents at my local Walmart. The color that would be equivalent to this would be Morghast Bone from Citadel for $4.55. I used a quick dry brush of this color all over the leather goods that we just did in Moccasin Brown. As you can see, they have like these really intricate kind of runes and symbols on their holsters, as well as on the sheaths of their weapons. So I decided to pick out 2 thin layers of that, so that way you can see those details as well. The guy with the sword on the back there is kneeling down. He's got this really cool like multiple sheath thing going on in his back, which looks kind of cool as well. I'm not sure what that's directly for, but I just thought it looked cool, so I just add that detail in there. So once we're done with doing that detail with the dry brushing with the khaki, we now move on to the actual guns. So next detail we're working on the guns that these guys are carrying. A lot of these guys are carrying these really interesting looking pistols and rifles and cannons and special weapons and all kinds of cool stuff. Now, I'm not sure what the Eldar make their weapons out of, but so I talked to one of my buddies who's actually quite the Warhammer 40k guy, and he told me that the Eldar use Wraithbone, I think is what it's called. It's some kind of like bone that's made using psychic energy that they use to manipulate into different shapes and stuff for their gear. Sounds kind of dark, but then again, it's also Warhammer 40,000. So he says, yeah, it's like a bone color is what the weapons are made out of, because it's made from wraith bone. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So because of that, I decided to use Taupe Gray by Anita's Acrylic. This cost 65 cents at my local Hobby Lobby, and I just painted all their guns, the entirety of their guns, in that wraith bone, make it look like it's completely made out of mystical, magical space bone stuff. I don't know what you would call this stuff. But anyway, so Wraithbone, I guess what it's called. So I put 2 thin layers of that all over the actual miniatures, over the guns and things of that nature. These guys also got these kind of weird, like Easter egg looking grenades hanging off their belts as well. I'm not sure what that's made out of. I just assume it's made out of the same exact Wraithbone material as well. So I just picked those details out as well. And once I let that dry, we can move on to our metallics. So there's actually quite a bit of metallic on these guys as well, especially for things like their blades or their weapons, the jewelry that they're wearing, all kinds of really interesting kind of details going on all over these miniatures. So in order to create those and to pick out those details, I use a couple of metallic colors in order to do that. For all the silver elements, I use Folk Arts Gunmetal Gray, costs you about 75 cents at your local Walmart. The equivalent to this would be Lead Belcher by Games Workshop, which costs $7.80, almost about 10 times more than the Gunmetal Gray. So for those silver elements, I just put down 2 thin layers of that. So things like the barrels of the guns, the blades of the weapons, some of the other like iconography that they have hanging on their armor as well. For their gold elements, for things like the top of the wizard's staff, as well as for a lot of the jewelry, as well as the handles and hilts of their weapons, I picked out 2 thin layers of Emperor's Gold by Deco Art. That cost 75 cents at my local Walmart. The Games Workshop equivalent would be Citadel's Retribute armor, which costs $7.80, which is about 10 times more. So things like the edges of the rims of their shoulder pads, for example, the hilts of their weapons, same thing with the handles of their close combat weapons, any jewelry or ruins that they have hanging out for their belts and things, I picked out 2 thin layers for that. And the last thing I also picked out too was some of the armor elements along their elbows and knees, for example. I picked out 2 thin layers of copper by Folk Art, cost you about 75 cents at your local Walmart. The Games Workshop equivalent would be Screaming Bell, which costs $7.80 for that detail. And so whatever metallic elements you want, you go back and pick those out with 2 thin layers, and then ready to move on to some of the fine details. And the fine details that I'm referring to are the jewels that they have all over the weapons. So apparently the Eldar, I guess, use like enchanted gemstones which contain the souls of like dead relatives or something like that. These guys are very like undead for being space elves. But anyways, my buddy was explaining it to me. I wasn't really paying attention all that well, or I misunderstood him. But I think they have like these gems that have like spirits inside of it, I guess is how it works. And that's what powers all their technology, or is it psychic energy? I forgot. But it's something in these, they're called these gems that they use, right? So for the gems for that, I use green turquoise with Apple Barrel Paint. Cost me 50 cents at my local Walmart. Walmart. And I just put this color all over the gemstones, all over the weapons, the armor that they're wearing, the leather satchels they have. Wherever there's a gemstone, I use this green turquoise because it's contrasted nicely with the bone color of their weaponry as well as the moccasin brown of the leather goods. And I just picked out 2 thin layers of that. The color for this, the equivalent from Citadel, would be Pterodon turquoise, which costs $7.80. So I just put that 2 thin layers on, and we're ready to move on to some of the base work now. So for the bases on some of these miniatures, they look like they're standing on kind of rocks or ruins of boulders or something like that. Well, either case, whatever ruins they're standing on, I decided to pick out that detail in 2 thin layers of Skyline by Folk Art. You can get this at my local Walmart for about 75 cents. The color equivalent to this would be Rust Gray by Games Workshop, which is $4.55. Just put 2 thin layers on that base. I'm not going to bother dry brushing it because I'm going to do an over dry brush it over later on with some pale gray. But I just picked out 2 thin layers to kind of create some contrast to the normal base that these guys are standing on. And then from there, we're ready to work on the texturing. So as for the rest of the texturing on the bases, I picked out 2 thin layers of pewter gray by Folk Art, by Apple Barrel Paint. So I just put 2 thin layers of this directly onto the sand that we see there on the bases. Now if you'll notice, even though I put 2 thin layers of this stuff on there, you can still see some of the white undercoat picking through from the primer. Even though most people would not like that, that is perfectly fine with me, and the reason why is because I'm going to dry brush these bases with a pale gray anyway, so that's just going to add to the overall highlighting of these bases. So as you can see in this picture, I just did a quick dry brush with pale gray by Folk Art. As you can see, all that white undercut that was picking through the pewter gray, it doesn't really matter because it looks like it's just part of the base to begin with. So that part was really easy to do. And now that we're done dry brushing the base, the next thing we do now is an oil wash. So as I mentioned earlier, we are doing a quick paint method on this, and to do that we're doing an oil wash. An oil wash is an all-over wash, all over the entirety of the miniature as well as the bases as well. And when you do a quick paint method like this with an oil wash, traditionally speaking, a lot of people like using Army Painter Strong Tone. It's a beautiful product. It does exactly as advertised. The only problem though is that stuff costs $30 a can. It's actually quite pricey. The item I like to use is Deco Arts Midwax, not Deco Arts. What I like to use is Midwax Polyshade in Mission Oak colors. What I like to use instead. That stuff only costs $6.99 as opposed to the Army Painter Strong Tone, which almost costs a little under 5 times as much as my Midwax Polyshade. Now, what the oil washing does is a couple of things. The first thing it does, obviously, as you can see here, it darkens down the overall vibrancy of the colors that we used. As you can see, the vibrant colors that were there earlier have been muted down significantly and darkened down by that oil wash, and that's because of that dark brown Mission Oak color. But at the same time, though, it also seeps into the recesses of the miniature as well. It brings a lot of the details we can see earlier, like the individual grains of sand on the bases, for example, the folds and the bending of the fabric, the runic design that's on their armor, for example. So that part looks really nice. Another thing the oil wash also does too is it blends the transitions between our base coats and our dry brushing. As you can see, that charcoaly kind of chalky pastel look is now gone because all the colors have now merged. The dry brushing has now merged seamlessly with the base coating and smooth out those color transitions to make it look more organic. And the last thing this stuff will do, of course, will be to put a protective layer of polyurethane all over your miniatures. So you will need to let this stuff dry and cure for about 24 hours, so that way the polyurethane will harden. It'll create a hard clear coat that's going to be high gloss finish that's going to protect your miniatures from harm, which is going to be really nice as well. But you do need to let this stuff dry and cure. I, for example, like to paint in the evenings whenever I paint. So what I do is I make the oil wash the very last step I do for the evening. And then what happens is when I come back to the project, usually the very next day, I can pick up where I left off, and the stuff is completely dry as well as cured by that point. Now, next step, of course, is to take care of the bases. What I do is I put that into 2 thin coats of Folk Art Skyline. It's a beautiful bluish gray color I use for all the Necromuna miniatures in the studio's collection. Just put 2 thin layers of that along the rim of the bases. And the last thing I'm going to do real quick is apply a spray varnish all these miniatures. And it's going to be a matte varnish. And the reason why that is the case is because, like I said before, the polyurethane is going to be a high gloss finish. It's going to protect your miniature from weathering as well as from fading, but it's kind of glossy, and I don't care for that candy coated look. Now, if you do prefer that candy coated look, by all means, skip this next step, but for me, I don't like that. I like to have my miniatures have a matte finish, so what I use is a can of Krylon matte varnish spray from Walmart. Get that for $5.98. I just do the once over real quick, all of these miniatures to mute down that sheen of the polyurethane. And if you want to do exactly the same thing, you need to buy a can of Mutatorium varnish from Games Workshop, which costs $19.50. And once you are done, this is the end result of what your kill team is going to look like for your Voidborn Corsairs, Voidscarred Corsairs. There we go. They look absolutely fantastic. They look very cool with that turquoise armor. That red is really vibrant. They got these really weird looking bone type weapons as well as kind of all kinds of alien gear. And these guys would look amazing on the tabletop. So if you plan on using these guys for Warhammer 3000 kill team, this is exactly the way we paint these guys up. And if you're planning on using them for Necromunda, like I am, this will make a brilliant Cold Trader Outcast gang, and that's exactly how I'm going to be using these guys here in a second. So now that we're done talking about exactly how we went about painting these using the Cheapskate method, let's talk about the materials you need to purchase from Citadel as well as Army Painter to achieve the exact same result we did, except using their products instead. Alright, so this is what I like to call the Citadel / Army Painter method, which means you're purchasing all your products from either Army Painter or Citadel, and this is assuming, of course, that you're purchasing all these products for the very first time. First of all, you need to buy a can of Corax White Spray, which is going to cost you $17, as well as a pot of Pterodon Turquoise, which costs you $7.80. After that, you'll be buying Thunderhawk Blue, Averland Sunset, Teclis Blue, Caliban Green, Cyberite Green, and Blue Horror, all of which cost you $4.55 per pot. You'll then need to buy a pot of Wildwood, which costs you $7.80, and then from there you need to buy a pot of Bugman's Glow, Cadian Flesh Tone, Morghast Brown, Moghast Bone, Baylor Brown, Slanesh Grey, Eshin Grey, Flayed One Flesh, Mephiston Red, XV88, as well as Rakarth Flesh, and all those cost you $4.55 for those. You'll also need to buy a pot of Lead Belcher and Screaming Bell, which costs $7.80 for those colors, as well as Rust Grey, Doombull Brown, Ulthuan Grey, all those cost you $4.55 for those. A pot of Aethermatic Blue for $7.80, as well as Retributor Armor, which costs $7.80 as well. Now you'll need to buy a can of Army Painter Strong Tone for $32 in order to do the oil wash that we did with, instead using our Midwax Poly Shade. You'll have to use the Army Painter for that. You buy a rattle can of Munitorium Varnish for $19.50 for the matte finish on your miniatures, and of course, you buy a pot of Asher Granite if you want to do the texture on your bases for $7.80. Now, when you combine all those items together, and assuming you're purchasing it all for the very first time, you're talking about a grand total of $209.55 to paint up your miniatures the same way we did, except using materials from Citadel and Army Painter. When you combine that with our Cheapskate method, which costs us $31.82, you're talking about a grand total savings of $177.73. So if you're looking for a way to save some money on the miniatures wargaming hobby, might I suggest you paint up your miniatures the Cheapskate way. So there you guys have it. That's how you go about painting up these miniatures as quickly and cheaply as possible, only costing a little over $32 in order to paint up your miniatures exactly the same way we did, using our Cheapskate method as opposed to the Citadel Army method, which is $209.55. So if you're looking for a quick way to save some money on your miniature wargaming hobby, may I suggest you paint up your miniatures using the Cheapskate method. You create a beautiful tabletop finish, it looks really good on the tabletop, and at the same time saving you a buttload of money at the same time. So that's good for those of you guys. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is invaluable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogger.com for all the latest greatest hobby news related to this channel. That's good for this one, you guys. I'll catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.